The knock came just as the tree lights flickered and went dark, the apartment sinking into a quiet that felt louder than any sound, and Mara stood frozen in the middle of her living room with a mug of cocoa cooling in her hands, thinking this was it. This was how Christmas ended for her every year now, cold, quiet, and unfinished. Until the knock came again, hesitant, like whoever was on the other side didn't quite believe they deserved an answer. And something in her chest cracked open because no one knocked on her door anymore, not since the world she knew had folded in on itself and left her standing in the wreckage, counting breaths and days and holidays she wished she could skip. She didn't move at first. She stared at the door, at the thin line of light bleeding out from underneath it, at the reflection of herself in the darkened window. 37, hair pulled back without care, eyes tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. And she thought of all the reasons not to open it. All the ways opening doors led to expectations and disappointment. But the knock came a third time, softer, apologetic, and that was the sound that finally pushed her forward, because she knew that sound too well, the sound of someone asking without wanting to impose, the sound of loneliness dressed up as politeness. When she opened the door, the hallway was dim and smelled faintly of pine cleaner, and standing there was a boy no older than 10, bundled in a coat that had seen better winters, holding a paper plate covered in foil like it was a fragile offering, his eyes wide and unsure, his cheeks red from the cold, and behind him a woman hovered halfway down the hall, hands clasped, ready to retreat at the first sign of rejection. "Sorry," the boy said, voice small but steady. "My mom said we made too many cookies, and she said I could bring some to the neighbors. And I knocked on a few doors, but no one answered, and then I saw your lights go out, and I thought maybe you were home." Mara swallowed, the words catching in her throat, because no one had noticed her lights go out before. No one had thought of her as a neighbor worth knocking on, and she found herself nodding, stepping aside, hearing herself say, "You can come in, it's warmer," before she'd fully decided, before she could stop the instinct that told her warmth, even borrowed, mattered. The boy's face lit up with relief, and the woman down the hall relaxed just enough to offer a grateful smile before retreating back into her apartment, the door clicking shut like a promise kept, and Mara ushered the boy inside, closing the door on the quiet hallway and opening it onto a living room that felt suddenly less empty, even with the lights out. "I'm Eli," he said, carefully placing the plate on the coffee table like it might break, and Mara told him her name, offered him cocoa reheated on the stove, found candles and lit them one by one, the soft glow filling in the corners of the room where shadows liked to linger. They sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, polite, cautious, the kind of distance people keep when they don't know the rules yet, and Eli talked about his school, about how his mom worked late shifts and still tried to make Christmas feel like Christmas, about how the building felt quieter this year because a lot of people had moved out or just stopped coming home. And Mara listened, nodding, asking questions she hadn't asked anyone in a long time, surprised by how natural it felt to be present, to be here instead of lost in her own head. She didn't tell him that she'd once loved Christmas lights and music and crowds, that she'd once hosted dinners and laughed loudly and believed the future was something you could plan, because this wasn't the time for that, and because she'd learned that some truths needed the right moment to breathe. Instead, she listened, and when Eli asked why she didn't have any decorations up besides the small tree in the corner, bare except for white lights and one old ornament hanging alone, she shrugged and said she liked things simple, which was true in the way truths often are when they're incomplete. The ornament caught the candlelight and spun slightly, and she felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that had settled there 3 winters ago and never quite left, the ache of a life interrupted, of words unsaid and plans cut short. And she wondered, not for the first time, how much longer she could carry it alone. Eli finished his cocoa and looked around, curious, noticing things adults often overlook, and he pointed to a framed photo on the shelf, a picture of Mara and another woman standing in front of a half-decorated tree, arms around each other, smiling in a way that felt like another lifetime. "Is that your sister?" he asked. And the question landed gently but firmly, like a hand on her shoulder, and Mara felt the room tilt as the past nudged its way into the present, patient and insistent. "She was my wife," Mara said after a moment, the words unfamiliar on her tongue after so long, and Eli's eyes widened, not with judgment but with understanding, the simple acceptance children have when they haven't learned yet what the world expects them to think. "Oh," he said, and then, after a beat, "She looks nice." And Mara laughed, a short, surprised sound that felt like breaking glass and healing at the same time, because yes, she had been nice and funny and the kind of person who filled rooms without trying, and the kind of person who knocked on doors to make sure no one was alone. They sat in silence for a bit after that, the candles flickering, the buildings settling around them, and Mara felt the old urge to retreat, to close herself off before the weight of memory became too much. But Eli shifted closer, not touching, just near enough to share warmth, and said, "My dad used to live with us, but he left, and sometimes my mom gets really quiet, like she's thinking about things she doesn't want to say out loud, and I don't know how to help, so I just sit with her, because she says that helps." And something in Mara loosened, the knot of regret and guilt she'd carried since the night she'd chosen work over a conversation that never got to happen, the night she'd assumed there would be time later. And she realized that maybe sitting with someone was enough, maybe presence could be its own kind of apology. She found herself telling Eli about the night the phone rang, about the icy road and the hospital lights and the way the world narrowed down to a single unbearable moment, about how she'd spent the first year after trying to be strong, and the second year trying to be numb, and the third year wondering if this was all there was left for her, a quiet apartment and a calendar she stopped checking. And Eli listened the way only children can, without trying to fix it, without offering platitudes, just listening. And when she finished, he nodded and said, "I think she'd be glad you still have her picture out." And Mara closed her eyes, letting that thought settle, letting it soften the sharp edges of her grief. A sudden knock on the door made them both jump, and Mara's heart raced, the old fear of interruption flaring. But when she opened it, the woman down the hall stood there, cheeks flushed, eyes apologetic. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I just realized I sent him off without asking your name, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay." Mara assured her it was, introduced herself properly, and the woman smiled, relief evident. "I'm Rosa," she said, and then hesitated, glancing at the dark apartment, the candles, the small tree. "If you don't have plans," she added carefully, "we're not doing anything big, just dinner and a movie, but you're welcome to join us." The invitation hung in the air, heavy with possibility and risk, and Mara felt the familiar urge to decline, to protect the fragile peace she'd built around her solitude. But she looked at Eli, at the hopeful tilt of his head, at the way he held space for her pain without even realizing it, and she thought of all the reasons not to open it, all the ways opening doors led to expectations and disappointment. But the knock came a third time, softer, apologetic, and that was the sound that finally pushed her forward, because she knew that sound too well, the sound of someone asking without wanting to impose, the sound of loneliness dressed up as politeness. When she opened the door, the hallway was dim and smelled faintly of pine cleaner, and standing there was a boy no older than 10, bundled in a coat that had seen better winters, holding a paper plate covered in foil like it was a fragile offering, his eyes wide and unsure, his cheeks red from the cold, and behind him a woman hovered halfway down the hall, hands clasped, ready to retreat at the first sign of rejection. As the evening wore on and Eli grew sleepy, curling up under a blanket, Mara caught her reflection in the darkened TV screen and saw something she hadn't in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but relief, the kind that comes when you realize you don't have to carry everything alone. When it was time to go, Rosa hugged her, a brief, sincere embrace that lingered just long enough to say thank you without words, and Eli pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. "It's for you," he said, serious, and Mara waited until she was back in her apartment, the door closed, the candles still burning low, to open it. Inside was a simple drawing, a tree with lights, 3 stick figures standing together, and above them, in careful, uneven letters, the words, "You are not alone." And Mara sat down on the couch and let herself cry. Not the racking sobs of fresh grief, but the quieter tears of release, of something easing its grip. She taped the drawing to the wall near the tree, right beside the old ornament, and when she plugged the lights back in and watched them glow steadily, she felt a small, steady warmth spread through her chest, not erasing the past or fixing everything, but reminding her that healing didn't mean forgetting, that kindness could arrive in unexpected forms, that sometimes all it took to change a night or a life was a knock on the door and the courage to answer.